Hey,
Special effects.
There's an app for that.
hey,
Special
welcome to
effects.
MAST Tech Talk. MAST Tech Talk is about providing the news, the how-tos, and building up the MAST Tech community. We want to encourage those who are serving as MAST Techs and ensure they have the resources for them to do the job. Now, just to let you know, this is our version 1.00. You do not want to see the version 0.001 and definitely 0.002. They're very terrible. But we are going to give you quality information. This information is Chuck, would you say this information is for the person who's never experienced a MAST event?
Maybe somebody that's new to Bible translation, sure.
Okay.
We'll cover a wide range of topics here. It's going to be good. I'm glad people are joining us. So, if you started at 001 and now we're at 1.00, does that mean there was 99 drafts of this opening?
Means we're almost out of beta.
This is all we got. Okay. No. Hey, this is going to be good. I'm looking forward to this. I think we're going to learn some of the history, and we're going to be educated on the way too.
And Mark, since we used a foreign term, there might be some people who don't know what MAST is. Can you explain what MAST is in a very short way?
Well, most people think it's the tall thing that sticks up out of the middle of a sailboat, and that is one of the things that it is. But in our case, it's MAST, Mobilized Assistance Supporting Translation. Rock on. Who was that? I think that was somebody important trying to call me. Mobilized Assistance Supporting Translation. It's a simplified but effective way of translating the Bible that lets native tongue speakers translate from a language of wider communication, thought into their own language. It's got 8 steps. What are you shaking your head?
I'm just seeing if I could get my phone into infinity here.
Oh.
What are the 8 steps? You remember?
I don't remember the 8 steps.
Okay, we'll provide more information about MAST. So
yes.
There are different tools that we use for MAST. Largely, we've been using a tool called Translation Studio. We're also using Autographa. They've been using VMAST. They've been using word processing like Microsoft Word or LibreOffice, and even pen and paper. But as far as the type of techno, why would it be better to use computers and tablets to do the job for MAST?
Well, back in the olden days when we used typewriters, one translator telling me that he estimated that he retyped the Gospel of John 15 times before he got it right. You'd be translating along and I got the wrong word. Zzz, start over again. Or typo. Zzz, depending how far along you were in the translation process and where you really trying to get it fine and community testing. You didn't want to do a lot of backspaces and a lot of whiteout. You wanted to look. So, and then rephrasing, reworking. Yeah, Bible translation used to take 25 years for a New Testament. And moving into the 1990s, it got down to late 90s. It got down to about 15 years, which is still too long.
And expensive.
Yep.
So we're using that technology.
We're automating it. We're leveraging. I think we live in this age. I think we live in the computer age, technology age, not to make our lives easy. I think God has given us this technology, and He's allowed us to be stewards of this technology in this age to reach the ends of the earth. You know, and we are the generation to really take it as far as we can. Yeah, it's I don't see why you know. I mean, I love it. I love my phone. I love airplanes. I love clean water, wells. You know, I don't have to have. I'm not going around by horse and buggy, but I really think the prime reason God has given us technology is to accomplish His purposes, and so yeah, we're going to leverage that.
So did you just answer the next question?
Which is,
what's the problem we're trying to solve?
well, I mean, so the problem we're trying to solve using technology and MAST is probably two or threefold. One is data portability. You know, we could use a regular word processor or a typewriter for Bible translation. Well, let's say word processor. You could open up your Microsoft Word or your Word Perfect, whatever you have, WordStar. Get it all nice and formatted. But then I, as basically an English-speaking only technician, I look at it and go, it looks fine, but I could easily lose verses, verse markers, chapter markers. You know, when you look at a non-Roman script, they're not using the numbers that we're familiar with. They're using, you know, triangles and just a whole different nomenclature for their number set. And I've worked through a document like that. It's a lot of work, and it's easy for non-Western eyes to skip verses and skip chapters. So we've devised a way to mark verses and mark chapters with format markers. Now, when this idea first came to be, it's like, hey, let's put a marker in there for a beginning of a chapter. And so we put a slash. We use a slash in the text followed by a character. And before standardization, translators would pick out any character. And they might say T for chapter. So slash T meant they start a new chapter. Oh, we need to start a new verse. Slash S for verse, they might pick. And so they would go through the whole Bible using their slash T's for chapters, slash S for verses, and at the end they would bring it in for publishing and formatting. They're going slash T for chapter, slash S for verse. Really? Anyway, but if you knew the key, they could take and they could work that. Well, at some point, it became prudent to decide to come up with universal standard format markers, USFM, instead of somebody's format markers, SFM. And that was supposed to be a joke there. So, and so in the early 2000s, SIL, Summer Student Linguistics, and UBS, United Bible Society, got together, created the USFM standard. And that is largely a set of codes, escape codes, I suppose, that define the document. It defines a good part of the Bible translation. It doesn't do a good job of all the formatting, the indenting and the italicize, but it tells you where the quotes are. It tells you where paragraphs are. It tells you verses, header, verses, chapter. It tells you the book name. It tells you if it's UTF-8. There's at least a couple hundred UTF markers. There's a couple hundred USFM markers. But you rarely, as a MAST technician, if you know A, that they exist, and B, if you know slash V for verse, and slash C for chapter, and slash P for paragraph, you're well on your way. And so that was sort of the first real advancement in using computers in Bible translation, because then any translator could do slash C, chapter name, slash V1, type in the verse. And the computer technician didn't have to know that a verse or not. They could just look at all the escape codes and go, yep, this is formatted. And you could even run a test. You could run a script to say, are all the chapters there? Are all the verses there? Mm-hmm. Yes, yay or nay. It's like go back and say, chapter 4, verse 8, you missed it. I don't have it. Unless you might have the verse, you didn't put the verse marker in. Translator goes, oh, you're right. I meant to go back. Puts it in. So that automation has been afforded, that computers are good at, has been afforded by the markers. And so you can do Bible translation in just a word processor now. But it does get a little cumbersome. And so that's one of the reasons we are going to talk about some of the Bible translation software tools that we have. It helps create a cleaner interface with the Bible translator to do their work on without stumbling over some of the computer jargon in the background.
So USFM is one of the solutions to the problem, and again, what is that problem again?
The problem is transportability and survivability of data. So 10 years from now, when you're looking at that data set again and you want to run it through the computer, if there's no slashes, if there's no USFM markers, you've got a long couple months ahead of you. But if those format markers are out there, you stand a good chance of being able to import it into a tool and have the tool understand it and manipulate the data well. Okay.
Now, before we go to the next question, Chuck, get something to drink because you've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to ask Mark this question. Okay, you ready, Mark?
Probably not.
What is Creative Commons?
Creative Commons is a platform that allows us to put things out into the public domain without the encumbrances and costs of copyright. And it allows a paper trail to track something back so that you know that it's not copyrighted and not just being copied. So it's sometimes called open source is another form of this kind of idea. And but the big deal is that the reason we use Creative Commons is that traditionally Bible translations have been copyrighted by either the translator or the publisher, which effectively ties them up. In their mind, they think they're probably protecting it from being, I don't know, unnecessarily modified or whatever. But what usually happens is that the copyright owner, for example, one of the people groups that I'm familiar with needed a reprint of the New Testament. They ran out of New Testaments. But the copyright on that particular New Testament was held by a Bible society that said they would not print less than 5,000 copies, and they would not print them unless they were paid for up front. And they only needed like 750 copies. And they said, well, but it also needs to be revised. They said, well, you can't revise it. You're not authorized to do that. So they basically just, this people group had a translation completed and had no access to it because it was tied up in copyright. So Creative Commons alleviates that problem. And whoever is willing to do a decent job in either revising or printing or whatever is free to do so.
So I'm sure that anyone who participates in that has to sign off to the licensing, opening it up for
they're releasing it to open source, right?
Right. So with USFM being helping solve that solution to the problem with transportability, I think, did I say that word right, Mark?
I think so.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. How, Chuck or Luke, how does Creative Commons licensing become a solution to that problem? Also,
Well, the Creative Commons attribution share alike means that you can take that work and you can make a derivative out of it. So, for example, if I want to make a children's book or I want to make a women's Bible study book out of it, I can take that source text and I can import it into my editor, and I can make it interlinear, English and or, I can make it interlinear with like the language of wider communication, like the trade language of the area and the target language. Having the work in the Creative Commons means that the church does not need to come back to the West and say, please, can we have permission to use our Bible and to change it? You know, we found a better way to say, example, in Brazil, they used to, when they first translated, they couldn't use the word synagogue. It was too big of a word. And they said, well, so they translated it, the building specially set aside for the people of the tribe of Israel to worship them. No. 20 years later, they go, oh, we know what a synagogue is. We've had, you've taught us that in Sunday school. Just use the word synagogue. You know, the church should have the right to own their language and to fix it. And that putting it in the Creative Commons and having all authors sign that document saying, I give my work to the church, I give my work away as an author, means anybody can download it, maybe simplify it, maybe repair, get a better word in there, maybe make a derivative of a children's book or audio book or video, and not have to go back and get individual sign-off or permission of each of the original authors because it's already been. So yeah, so that's one. So the Creative Commons is a key part. Creative Commons share alike attribute is a very powerful part of what MAST produces.
hey Mark, did Chuck say everything that needed to be said?
At least.
Okay, before we go to this last question, there's going to be some people who are just happen to be on YouTube and wondering what is MAST, what does Wycliffe Associates do, how can I be a part of what is happening? And later on, we hope to talk more about those questions. But if you want to talk to someone about the possibility of volunteering, you can dial on the phone 1-800-THE-WORD, and they would be happy to help you point you to the right person. If you're a tech person and you want to be involved or be a MAST Tech, even to possibly step on the very footprint of Chuck Leash, aka Luke. No, that could be edited out. But if you're interested in the possibility of being a MAST Tech or volunteering, just making a difference out there, call 1-800-THE-WORD. So, Mr. Chuck, why we talked about Translation Studio, we talked about Autographa.
Why these solutions?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Well, so as we talk a little bit about USFM and back in the old days, when we first decided to start using markers, format markers, translators would actually have to type in the WAC, B, WAC, C, whatever, /. And so, and then we used to have word macros. macros. You have a macro bar sitting on top of that. Be adding your markers. Try to automate it. So MAST, the idea is you bring a number of believers together at the same time, and they begin translating God's word all at the same time. So you would have, I've seen it where you've got 10 translators all doing Luke. The facilitator will say, you've got chapter 1, you've got chapter 2, you've got chapter 3, you've got chapter 4, and so on. Well, all of a sudden, that's a lot of computers up and running, and you've got varying degrees of computer savvy in the room. And so what is the /P? What is the /C? And it gets a little bit jumbled and confusing. So Translation Studio was a solution that Wycliffe Associates was a key partner in creating. Helps to sort of present a user-friendly interface to break down the process. So you would have your source text on the left pane and your target text over here, verse 1. And you would do the 8-step MAST process along with using Translation Studio. So you would eventually be taking your source text, consume it. So consume it means you would read the entire chapter. You get the understanding of the whole thing, the high points, the low points, sort of what's going on. 1 Corinthians 13. The second step is you verbalize it. You find somebody and you try to tell back as much of it as you can. And this is not a test, so you don't have to get it, word for word perfect. I mean, you could, for that matter, it's really for you that you verbalize it. It's not for the other person. I mean, for that, you could tell it to a tree, But it's that drawing it out of your mind. I'm so excited to knock my glasses off. It's that drawing it out of your mind. What do you remember? And it's just part of the brain theory. Trying to get the brain to go back and scratch and what did I just read and what do I remember? And by doing that, by hearing yourself talk about it, it helps you put it in your own words and it helps you memorize it. So the next step, step 3, is you chunk it. And so we all chunk things in different quantities. So as we're memorizing a Bible verse, I might be able to memorize 2 words, 3 words. There, that's it. And Mark Hancock, you may be able to memorize half a chapter. So your chunk may be much larger than my chunk, so you chunk it, you put into your memory, commit it to memory, into your working memory. Next is the draft.
Blind draft.
Blind draft. Oh yeah.
Thanks for whispering.
Key. Blind draft.
And this is what I think one of the key, like you say, what you're saying, Mark, and you rightly pointed out. Blind draft makes it your own work. Is that how you put it? By blind drafting, it becomes your own.
Well, and blind drafting also is the key to making the particular passage flow, because you're basically recreating it in your mind in your own language to communicate the meaning of that chunk.
That's right.
So you're not trying to memorize it word for word.
So you close up your source text.
Right.
And so that's why the first 3 steps are so critical. They help get that source text working in your head so that you can begin a blind draft and write out as much as you can.
Right.
And so once you've got all your chunks written down, you might want to leave a little white space in there because it's a draft. Now you can go back and you can look at the source text again and you can compare the two. And check your draft. Is it complete? Is it there? Is it accurate? Is the clarity? Key terms. Have you captured the key terms? And you might want to work that over, edit it a bit. Then you move on to step 6. You take your work and you do a peer edit with a partner. You give your draft to another member of your team. You have them read it. And you ask questions back and forth, compare it to the source text. You may want to suggest some edits and you improve it. So now you've got 2 people involved in this. You're not looking for a word-by-word comparison to the source text. You're looking for maybe thought by thought. You want to communicate clearly. Then you want to also go back, make sure you've got your keywords. You know, righteousness. What are the keywords of that source text? And then you do the verse-by-verse check. That's step 8. And that's going to take 3 people total. It takes the translator and 2 partners. One partner will translate the mother tongue into this back to the source language, and the second partner with the appropriate competence in the source language. The translator will read their translation aloud, chunk by chunk, in their target translation, in their mother tongue translation. And one of the language listeners will listen and he will verbalize it back to the source language. So you're sort of doing a back translation. You are doing a back translation. And that's that's how you're comparing it back to the source. Now your wording is not going to be the same. You know, some languages have subject, verb, object, subject. You know, so some of those changes are going to happen. Do you have a brown cow or do you have a cow brown? You know, so it's not going to be literal verse word for word transliteration, but it's more meaning by meaning or precept by precept. So those are the 8, and I'll just say them all again. Consume, verbalize, chunk, line draft, self-edit, peer edit, keyword check. Number 8, verse by verse check. And Translation Studio has different modes to more or less help you in the different stages of this. Now, it's not perfect. And we're going to talk some about why Translation Studio, where it's not so good with MAST and where it is better with MAST. And we'll talk a little bit about Autographa, why it's better in some areas for some of the MAST process and why it's not so good for some of the MAST process.
How does Autographa solve that? Did you basically answer that question about Autographa also?
So one of the problems, one of the situations with Translation Studio is it pre-chunks everything. Remember in step 3 it was, when we did our chunking? Well, it has to, yeah. It's your chunk. You decide what is the smallest unit of information you can put in your head and work with. Translation Studio has been pre-chunked. Somebody went through and decided, here's a chunk, here's a chunk, here's a chunk, here's a chunk. And for many people, those chunks do not line up with reality. So it kind of messes with brain theory. Autographa does not have that constriction. It flows a little better. It has suggested chunks. I mean, the source text will be highlighted in like a blue, but you won't have these constricted window panes that say, thus is a chunk. And so that's where Autographa maybe shines a little better than Translation Studio is in the chunking phase. And
really the cool thing is, we were just talking about Creative Commons. Translation Studio is basically a Creative Commons type of software.
Yes. Yep.
And this using the processes of Bible translation, the steps in Bible translation that's been used in the past, and also adding the MAST techniques that we just talked about. But for other projects, especially in India, they had a tough time using Translation Studio. Can't really remember what the issues they were having. Maybe it was the chunking, but within over in India, they decided to create a different version using the MAST technique, and allowing that to be under the Creative Commons. So it's pretty exciting to be in Bible translation.
Yes.
I mean, I always refer, even 5 years ago, I talk about how exciting it was to be in Bible translation, to bring satellite receivers over to the African bush and be able to communicate, for the translator to communicate to a consultant who was over in the United States. They would be able to chat. They could send out emails. I thought that was pretty exciting. But now, even Bible translation is being done by the local church. I always refer this, looking at Galatians 4:4, talking about in the fullness of time, God sent His Son. That's paraphrase. But this is the where. Chuck, you said this earlier, that this is the ripe time to be in Bible translation, and it's really exciting. Mark, do you happen to have any? I'm putting you on the spot now, and you can close. Do you have a when you have done a MAST working as a MAST tech? Has there been a time where it was just that you knew that what you were doing, or a story of a national translator, as they were translating the word in God's word into their own language? Was there a light bulb moment for you?
Well, something that dawned on me recently is that this MAST process is the ultimate Bible translation acceleration kit. I mean, it's like somebody kicked the afterburners in on this thing, and it's accelerating like we've never seen before. Had a couple of situations. One is in the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific, and their language of wider communication was actually English. So this group of pastors got together to do a translation project. There were 5 language groups that were represented, and my wife Tracy had actually come along to be a facilitator on the trip, and I had brought in printing equipment and laptops, and I felt like a pack mule bringing in all that stuff. I had 12 laptops in my carry-on, but this particular pastor was translating, and he said, well, yeah, whenever we get to the word grace, we just say the word grace. And Tracy said, well, I think you need to see if you can find a word in your language that conveys that instead of just using the English word. Well, okay. So we gave him a Bible dictionary and some helps, and he studied and scratched his head a little bit, and all of a sudden we heard him say quietly, wow, grace really is amazing, isn't it? And it was for the first time. This pastor had been preaching for probably decades, and for the first time he actually saw the picture of what grace really is as he tried to translate it into his own language. Many of these pastors have been preaching by looking at the English or whatever language and kind of doing an on-the-fly interpretation of what they're seeing, and so they've already got that thought process going. And what MAST does is it adds discipline and method to that, and a little rigor, so to speak, so that they get the best meaning, not just what happens to come to mind as they're preaching. So, in another place, I was working in Papua New Guinea with an elderly gentleman. We were recording Bible passages for his people group that didn't read or write, and he was an older fellow, and we were working on editing and kind of interacting back and forth. And all of a sudden, I noticed he was really quiet, and I looked over, and he had a tear running down his cheek. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I've wanted to have Bible in my language ever since I was a small boy, and I never dreamed that I would be the one to do it." And all of a sudden, I had a tear going down my cheek, and I said, "I never dreamed that I would be the one to help you do it." I said, 3 months ago, I was a computer mechanic in Dallas, Texas, climbing ladders and stringing wires.
That's right. God is good.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Grace is amazing.
We had one mass dedication in Southeast Asia where this man traveled on foot for a day. Then he took a canoe for a day. And then he took a 3-day bus trip. He arrived at the New Testament dedication in his language. This man was in his 90s, and he said, "I've been praying since the 1920s. Say this one. And see the picture of this diminutive little. See the picture of this man from Southeast Asia. We would say short in stature, smallish in stature. At that New Testament dedication, and behind him are 4 young men. Each he comes up to the shoulder on each of these young men. They're his grandsons, and his grandsons were the translators on this man in his New Testament. And what a life! Well invested, praying for that, and the grace of God to allow that man to see that, to have his own grandkids, his own grandsons, 4 of his grandsons to be translators of it. The look in that man's face is like, I can die now. Very happy, very fulfilled. So, and that was the mass process. And that's what we're doing. That's what you'd be a part of.
Well, I want to thank you, Chuck, and Mark, and we'll have other people being a part. We're trying to figure out how to present this. If it's going to be live, if this one we're actually taping before. I promise we'll try to edit some of the things. But
how will those watching know what's edited?
Well, I'll be the one who edits it, so you will definitely know, I'm sure. But I totally forgot what I was going to say. So as you watch this, well, in the description notes, well, I'll have an email address. If you have any ideas, those of you who have gone through a MAST event as a tech, those who have been, those people who have gone through the workshops with Wycliffe Associates, and if you have any questions or things that you want us to cover, any ideas, please let us know. I mean, and especially those who have participated as MAST Tech, we want you to be able to help train us also. We know there's a lot of information that you could pass on. So thank you everybody for having the patience to and watching us. We really appreciate your time. That's why we want to try to do this a little shorter. So let me just close off, talk about MAST Tech Tech. MAST Tech Talk is not associated with the Wycliffe Associates. We just want you to be a part of the MAST community, and together we can learn from each other. Please subscribe, click on the bell, and be notified. And thank you again for sharing your time with us. Any final thoughts, Mark? You done, Chuck?
The only thought I would have is, hey, one reason we do Translation Studio instead of a text editor is it also keeps track of translators. The USFM doesn't have format codes for translators, and so Translation Studio, another reason we use it. So thanks for asking.
All right.
Also allows you to run the software on an inexpensive hardware, like a tablet.
Hopefully. So, hey, you guys take care. We will try to do this every week. This first time we'll give it some time, and then we'll go back probably in another 2 weeks. So you take care.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.